was a quick change. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. I do want to say, first of all, on behalf of my team and our work at the Kaiser Foundation, a huge thank you to Michelle, Joel, and Results for America. I cannot overstate the impact that they've had on our work, and they've just been an amazing partner. Rick Lowe, this is very exciting to be with you. You're in a sea of policy wonks, data experts, evidence analysts, and really the person everybody really wants to talk to is the artist in the room. And that there's something about that, about what you as an artist bring to the equation of dealing with difficult social issues. Yeah. When did the light go on for you as a creative person, as an artist, that there was a deep role that your work could play in social change and economic mobility?
Yeah. Well, it goes back to, I heard a lot of the mayors talking about youth, and we can't ever underestimate the power of youth and their wisdom. I had been creating work about social issues, doing paintings and sculptures until a 16-year-old kid came to my studio with his class, and he told me, he said, "Mr. Lowe, while your paintings and sculptures show what happens in our communities, that's not what we need. We need solutions. We already know what the problems are. If you're creative, why can't you create a solution?" So that was like this kind of wisdom that just blew me away, as an artist. So then I went out and I investigated ways that I could do things as an artist that could be poetic and symbolic, but also had a practical application. And I found this is a very interesting term that came up in the 1970s by a German artist. He called it social sculpture.
Social sculpture.
And he defined social sculpture as the way in which we shape and mold the world around us. And he said, basically was saying if we look at the world as a big piece of sculpture each and every day, we're all sculpting it. And he said that everybody has to be an artist. And so that was the thing that kind of gave me a little bit of a shift, to think that maybe, this creativity can work outside of the studio into community contexts. And how can I use my creativity in all kinds of ways? I have to also just give up a little bit of secret here. The reason that I'm here is part of my social sculpting, because you have to be creative in how you get things done. Now, I knew that it's not very likely that I could get you to sit down and listen to me talk about art and have the mayor of Tulsa to hear me talk about art. So I agreed to do this, and I could get you both at the same time. So this is really my meeting with you, to tell you about the power of art and how it works. So
we are very accessible, actually, more than people realize. Well, that's awesome, and I love that term, social sculpture, and I like how you suggest that we're all very much involved in it. Maybe I could just use that as a segue to invite you to show us a little bit, and just about. I know you've brought some great images of your work, and what your initiative has been, and maybe with some highlight of what Project Row House, which is one we all know, and kind of how that's evolved over time.
Yeah,
I'll leave it to you to walk.
If I had a clicker, I would do that, but I don't seem to have one.
Okay.
So, but in the meantime,
a clicker will come.
But in the meantime, I will say this. Many people here probably are very familiar with the idea of Richard Florida's rise of the creative class and the importance of the arts and stuff. And I think there were a couple of things that the mayor spoke about earlier, which rings true to me, and the whole idea of social sculpture introduced me to this notion that it's great to have creative people within a community. It's essential, but they don't necessarily have to come from the outside. I mean, we have to figure out how to ignite that creativity within local populations. And one of the things that kind of helped me understand that from an economic standpoint was, I guess about 10 years or so ago, I was invited to a little town in just outside of Seoul, Korea. The mayor was doing a big project there where he was going to redevelop a 30-block area, and it was a very vibrant old neighborhood. The infrastructure was old, and they were trying to increase density and stuff. And so they were basically going to move everybody out and pull together, build a new community. And what was really concerning for me was that that local community was thriving based on small family businesses. And they were going to be lost in the process of this redevelopment. So I thought, why is it that small entrepreneurs are displaced when new things come along. And it occurred to me that one of the things was that those small businesses didn't position themselves to have anything to offer to the new development. So we set up a program that was a business competition in which we solicited all these little small businesses to be in competition to think about how their business could exist within this larger new development. And it was really an interesting process, of understanding. I think actually the city's still using that now. But that also taught me a little bit about what happens in my own neighborhood in Houston. So speaking of Project Row Houses, Project Row Houses started in 1994, and it was one of those just really disinvested communities where, it was dilapidated, no investment, whatever. And the thing that I learned from the Korea thing was that after desegregation, people had the opportunity to go other places. But those that couldn't go, they didn't use their creativity to figure out how to reimagine things, to make things possible for them where they were. And so that's been a big focus of mine, is how do you instill creativity among those people who are still in a place to reimagine who they are, where they are, and how to enhance their opportunities within the context where they are. So with this particular project, it was just a project where I went back to the roots of artists like John Biggers, who's a Southern artist, had done lots of paintings about shotgun houses, the history and all that stuff, and recontextualize these old houses as a value, an asset to the community, as opposed to a liability. And so we basically, with the creativity of folks from all over, to reimagine this place as a place that offers, cultural opportunities and creative challenges for people. Now, one of the things, though, I think about the arts, that the arts add to the whole, economic development context, is that, and this is something that we'll talk about a little bit about Tulsa, is how do you get people to believe that these neighborhoods are worth investing in? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the ways that we've been able to do this with Project Row Houses is to do it through culture, and do it through art. Everybody has an interest in that. So at any given time, at a project like Project Row Houses, you may have somebody who's from the lowest economic spectrum, of society to the highest in that space, because there's a connectedness through culture. I'm just going to flip through these slides. I'm not going to, talk very much about them specifically. But anyway, so that project has just kind of gone, and it started to do incubating small businesses and, bringing all kinds of different groups together, larger developments now.
And you, I'm just reacting in the moment here, but artists are not just, in your mind, artists per se, but people who are engaged creatively to improve their lives and their communities. It sounds like how do you define artists in this?
Yeah, in this particular situation, I think that, when I say artists, Joseph Beuys said everybody is an artist, and that is in the social sculpture context, right? So everybody, have their ways and capacities to engage in creative development. So for instance, with Project Row Houses, one of the central parts of it that started to give its identity as something that was a unique thing within that community was we had these 22 houses, we had an arts program, we had an education program going, and there were 22 houses originally. We had 7 remaining houses, and we had on our board the president of a company called U.S. Homes Corporation, largest home builder in the country at the time, and they do something they call the Home Show. Each year they'd build a new home, they'd have all these products put in the homes, to sell them to vendors or show them to vendors. And he crafted this idea of a program for this project that kind of changed its trajectory. We wanted to do some housing that was symbolic of how we could care for those less off, but we didn't have the resources to do it. He said, what if we take, instead of spending money on this big house in the suburbs to put all these supplies in, we renovate those 7 houses and allow those supplies to go into those houses, that will upgrade those houses beyond the level that anybody would imagine them, and then put young single mothers in there, and to show the kind of quality that you can have within a little shotgun house with low-income families. And so that kind of creativity, I think, is what it takes to move things forward. This is just an example of the economic impact that wasn't even envisioned at the time, but the real estate values in 1995 was $1 a square foot, and now it's upward to, actually that stops at like 2015, it's up to like $60-something per square foot in the neighborhood. Anyway, yeah, and then just kind of showing some other, that was Project Row Houses. This is a project in Dallas that's a very a high apartment rental area called Vickery Meadow in North Dallas, and it had gone through depreciation, and they wanted somebody to do an art project there, and I was looking around, and it looked pretty dismal because these were apartments that were built in the 1960s. They were built basically for the single upwardly mobile college graduates. It was built around this idea of having your pool house and your parking garage, so there were no street amenities and that kind of stuff. And but over time, as depreciation happened, then it turned to what the identity was, that it was a violent place. And one of the reasons for that was because it began to be occupied greatly by immigrants and refugees, because there were so many apartments there. There were always places to put people. So the International Refugee Committee and Catholic Charities would place people there. And so it became this place of, kind of dangerous, I guess. So we ended up doing this project of trying to figure out, how do you do something that, lift the quality of life of, the immigrants that are there, and change the narrative about this neighborhood? Because the narrative of a neighborhood has a huge impact on its economic capacity.
That's a great point.
And so we wanted to kind of shift the narrative of this and start working with local folks, and figured it out that one of the things that had shifted in that neighborhood was that it was built around this idea of independence, where people had their cars and they would drive places or whatever, but with all the immigrants and refugees, it was much more interdependent kind of circumstance. And so we had to figure out, how do we create that environment? So we did something, we decided we would create markets. And so we started to think about what would be at the market, food and different kinds of crafts and stuff. So we started to collect from people that lived there the kinds of crafts and things that they did. And then we set up an apartment and started doing workshops with neighborhood folks, helping them learn things, and they were helping us learn things, just kind of teaching each other different crafts. And then we set out to do a market, which turned out to be, which was actually pretty amazing, because the folks that had invited me, a museum, the National Sculpture Center, they were skeptical because they didn't think people would go there. The social service agencies were skeptical because they didn't think that the people that they served would go out in a public context like that. And so we just kind of, we just gave it a shot, and we organized it around food. And there were so many different people that brought food from their culture to participate there, and we moved from there. I mean, all of a sudden, actually, that one housing apartment complex that we started with, it was where those young men are sitting on the bottom left-hand side, right-hand side. They're sitting on what was known as the drug tree when we first started. But once we started doing these activities and had the apartments there with the workshops and stuff, all of a sudden it became a place for music and culture. And then we went on, we started doing talent shows, and it just, the things just kept getting bigger and bigger, and more people were coming and enjoying. And but then I went through a little thing with a friend of mine. This is from an exhibition of a friend of mine, Mark Bradford, who was telling me this story about doing a show in London at this gallery called White Cube, and that painting was going to sell for $1 million. And I said, well, he said, this group, the White Cube, they've solidified how you place value on art. You just put it in a white cube. It's like putting it on a pedestal.
Good.
And so I said, well, God, man, we need some white cubes in Dallas, for all these immigrant artists and stuff. And so I went back and I challenged a group of architects. I said, hey, can you design us a white cube, you know? I mean, just something simple. We want something that will, and so they did. They did these really beautiful little boxes for us, and we placed them along the street because one of the things that we felt was also missing, the markets were only happening once a month, but there was nothing on the street level for people. And so we used these little white cubes as gallery spaces to show the work of different artists and artisans that were coming through. But they also, what was really interesting, they also kind of served as like bus shelters because there were not, it was also places for people to have to stop along the way when they're kind of, walking from one place to the next, whatever, so on and so forth. And so that place became, and they also became, kind of hubs for community activities. So there were always people organizing things around these cubes, even outside of the exhibition opportunities. And within this project, of course, with immigrants and refugees, many of them are coming from cultures where they're professionals and they have expertise and they have the capacity to learn and they want to learn. You don't have to encourage most immigrants to be creative because they know that that's a part of their survival strategy. So we had people that were like engineers, like taking cooking lessons to become caterers and that kind of stuff. They're all trying to adjust their lives to the new condition, and so that project actually ended up providing a lot of that. This is a project in Athens, Greece, in which most of you might know that 2015 was a very tough time for Greece. I mean, there was a referendum whether they would stay in the EU. There was the run of the banks. There were the refugee crisis. All of that was happening. I just happened to be there for something with the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, their annual stockholders meeting. And I went to this place and I was just blown away at how crazy it was. This is called Victoria Square. And it was a square that had basically become taken over it became a refugee camp. And so the business owner, I don't have that slide. There was a slide I wanted to have. There was of the businesses where there were so many people occupying the square that they couldn't operate their businesses. So they all came together creatively as artists. They wouldn't call it art, but it was a beautiful gesture that they made these signs that said, "Business for sale." And every business on the square had that because they were sending a message to the mayor that they could not continue to operate if the square if the square was maintained as a refugee camp. And so I came along at that time because in 2016 I was invited to do something for Documenta, which is an big art exhibition, and they were hosting it in Athens. And what I wanted to do was to do something that would create a place where there could be some kind of dialogue about the complications between the Greek natives, the immigrants, and the refugees in a way that was outside of the traditional political conflict, and to do it from a cultural standpoint. So we took this little simple space and started doing workshops with people from different walks of life, giving them the opportunity to interact in different ways. And, of course, starting with the businesses, though, we created a weekly newspaper we call the One-to-One, where we were featuring, two businesses each week to actually kind of talk about the issues that they were facing. And all kinds of other kinds of activities. And a big part of this project is it happens in a building, but it also has access to this pedestrian street. So this is a workshop where it was supposed to be a youth workshop with children making boats about their journey, but it turned into something much larger because parents wanted to participate. Fashion show of Georgian Visavanka Day. This is like, I think this might be the African Festival Day. So it's all kinds of things that happen throughout this project. Now, the Greenwood project in Tulsa, it's kind of interesting because when people talk about Black Wall Street, I didn't know that much about Black Wall Street when I first went to Tulsa, But I didn't know about Wall Street, and we all know about Wall Street, right? Wall Street
I'm sorry, and there are Black Wall Streets in other communities across America.
Yeah.
Of that era. So it's interesting that it's not isolated as a Oklahoma phenomena.
Absolutely. It was something that basically was a symbol of economic opportunity for African Americans, and that's what Wall Street is for America too, right? It's kind of where we look to think about how things are going. But the Black Wall Street was a little bit different, right? So you have Wall Street that's all pristine, and it's about kind of in the larger presentation that I make on this, I also show the bull, because Wall Street is bullish and is arrogant and all this kind of stuff, But then you had, Black Wall Street, which is much more humble, and it's about survival, It's about being creative and how do you, sustain people in that particular time segregated society. And then, of course, the destruction of the neighborhood, and the mayor talked about this already, but one of the things that surprised me about Black Wall Street was, or about the Tulsa community in Black Wall Street, was that the little bit that I did know about it, I knew about the massacre, but I didn't know that they rebuilt. And that was the thing that was inspiring to me, that in spite of all the devastation that happened, they rebuilt that place, bigger and stronger than it was, prior. And to me, that was that's a very important thing to acknowledge, because there was a certain kind of courage and creativity that went into that. And as I talk to young people in Tulsa about what they think about, help me understand Tulsa, and the Tulsa Massacre and Black Wall Street and all that stuff. One of the things that I picked up that was really fascinating, a young man explained it to me, that there are two sides of this thing. There's the Greenwood district that's about the land, and the older generation is connected to that, and they want to see this land preserved. They want to see the Greenwood neighborhood of Black Wall Street to come back in ways that they remember it, or they remember being told about it. But this kid said, but there's the other side, though. He said, because I don't even know Greenwood. I don't live there. I've never been there. But he said, but I do have a desire for this spirit of Black Wall Street, the entrepreneurial aspects of it. And so from that, it was kind of like understanding that there are two sides of it. One is the land. I mean, there's a physical geographic area of Greenwood that was Black Wall Street, but there's also the spirit of Black Wall Street, the economic vitality of the people that live there. And so, so I'm really trying to think with this project, I'm trying to think about how do we harness that spirit, but also pay homage to that particular place as well. And the mayor has talked about, all the development that's happening there, and the challenges around, how do you include, African Americans into that, that process. So with we're doing an exhibition that will happen in 2021 with the centennial. But key to that is also connected to my idea of trying to stay as local as possible. Instead of bringing national artists into this opportunity, which I have lots of artists contacting me from around the country, around the world, wanting to know what's happening. But we're focusing strictly on Tulsa and Oklahoma-based artists for the first iteration of this. Mm-hmm. But how I see this as having an economic impact on this going forward is that 2021 should be the first iteration of this Greenwood Art Project opportunity. And we should do it biannually. Do it as, there are biennials all over the country, different kinds of art biennials. But this could be a biennial of artists that talk about the issue of race and those dynamics. Because I think Tulsa, that's one of the things that Tulsa have that's unique to offer. I mean, it has the centennial. It has a platform to step off and say, we're going to tackle this conversation for the nation. And then you start to bring artists in from around the world every 2 years, which will create a bigger kind of framework for the economic context of that neighborhood.
I remember when we were having coffee not that long ago, you said something which was stuck in my head when I asked about, do you have in mind local artists or national artists? And you drew an analogy to a crime scene, and what one does in the aftermath of the crime scene. I bet you remember. I would love you to draw that out.
Yeah. No, okay. So, we were very, very fortunate to get the Bloomberg Public Art Challenge, which is $1 million award for a city to do temporary public art. So we were very fortunate to get that. But with a Bloomberg award, there's like high expectations around the national framework of it. And of course, the easy way to do this, you get national artists in. But this particular thing is so specific to the people there. And when I talk to the people in Tulsa, you can feel that it runs deep in everybody's lives now that it's back on the table to talk about, because people want to know about it. They have so much to say about it. That to me, it started, I was thinking about it. I said, if there was a crime scene of something that happened, someone was assaulted or something, and the police come, there are people around that might have seen it or whatever, and you want their opinions, and they may have maybe even more interesting perspective. But you go and you talk to the person who was assaulted first. You want to start at the core, and then you work your way out of that. And so I wanted to treat this opportunity in Tulsa that way, where we allow, or we set up a framework for the local folks to have this conversation. And then you can start to bring people in. Now I would say, and I can just tell you how excited people are national and internationally, is that the community kind of asked me if I thought, who did I think would be interesting to do like some kind of permanent piece in Tulsa. And I started thinking about it, and I said, I had worked with David Adjaye, who is, he's the architect, the Ghanaian British architect who did the Smithsonian African American Museum here, or he did the design concept. And I worked with him like 12, 13 years ago, and I hadn't been in touch with him. And I hadn't been in touch with him since he became Sir David. He was knighted by the Queen. But I just thought, I would reach out to him and see, what did he think? And I used the old phone number I had for him, and he responded within 10 minutes. And he says, I absolutely want to be involved in this. And he already made his trip to Tulsa. We're in conversation with him. So, I know that Tulsa represents such a strong presence around this issue of race that people around the world would want to participate in that. And we just have to position it from a cultural standpoint of how to facilitate that infusion.
If we're down to a final minute here, and one of our mayors talked about enlisting the data pioneers of your community to help solve problems. How do people in our various communities enlist the artists? What is the way to say, we want your help, or we would like your involvement? What's the best approach?
Yeah, I think actually, my sense is that the cities to really encourage the different institutions to engage with artists. From universities, the large corporate groups. We have the new one that's moving into Tulsa, WBX, yeah. And they're, it's so interesting. Tulsa seems to have it kind of right, because even, the CEO of WPX that came in and they said, we're going to do this new building, and we want to have like an arts corridor in it, Once you can start to get people at kind of the top layers of institutions to start thinking about the value of art and allow them to do it, because I think it works much better when you have different, that coming from the city is one thing, but when you have it coming from multiple different spots, then it becomes really more interesting, because you have multiple ways to look at the approaches and to assess the impact of them.
Rick, we're so honored to be working with you, and all of us feel, I think, honored to have been anointed today, artists and social sculptors.
Yeah,
so this is a promotion. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.